So this is the Triad of Health. FDNP stands for Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Practitioner. I'm also a health coach from IIN, the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, where we focus mainly upon the behavioral and psychological approach of health coaching. And I'm currently enrolled in Functional Medicine University's training as a certified functional medicine practitioner. So these schools are not easy to say the least. It's advanced biophysiology in anatomy and physiology, I should say, and advanced biochemistry is what I meant. Sorry. So this is titled Nutrition by His Design. This means Yahweh, our Creator, our Heavenly Father, and more specifically, this is going beyond the scope of nutrition. So we're looking at everything as a whole when we're talking about a holistic lifestyle. And I have my contact information down here. So Chris at avitalexperience.com, ketoguide at yahoo.com, and then my website, upstreamvitality.com. Just as a full disclosure, so I do work a full-time job, and I'm not a full-time health coach or a practitioner at the moment, although that's what I'm transitioning into. So if you have any type of health challenges, or you know of people who have health challenges, please feel free to share this information with those that you think could benefit from the information found within, and send them my way if you want a health coaching program. So I use, and I've been trained to use medicine or food as medicine and targeted nutritional therapy with functional lab testing. And we'll get into that here in a little bit in this presentation here. And we'll go ahead and begin. And so what I want you to see, let me back up. So the learning objectives is understand how nutrition can harm or heal. I also want you to understand, and this is where I'm really going to focus in on, is how environmental factors impact one's health. So our conventional medical model has done us a disservice, I believe. A lot of the doctors really, enforce pharmaceutical drugs. They go after treating symptoms as opposed of identifying the root causes of a person's health challenges. And we're going to see some statistics here in just a moment. But what I really want to have people understand is I personally think that most medical doctors that are out there, they have a genuine sincerity of wanting to help people. And I think it's because of their lack of training, or maybe because once they reach the pinnacle of a doctor of medicine status, maybe they quit learning, or their learning only comes from the pharmaceutical reps that come into their offices to sell them drugs, to show them the information. And these are oftentimes very flawed lab studies of these pharmaceutical drugs. And anyway, I'm getting off topic there. So my whole premise is looking at the root cause or the underlying stressors of a person's health challenge. So I'm going to be talking a lot about my wife in this PowerPoint presentation, because it will help you understand how addressing someone's underlying stressors or the root cause of their health can really help get a person to a fast track plan of optimum health once again. So really this PowerPoint is going to cover how environmental factors impact health, the understanding of how leaky gut compromises your health, and really just to understand the triggers of an autoimmune disease. And so before we begin, I would like to say that I fully believe in my heart that I am called by our Heavenly Father, God Almighty, or Yahweh, that if we get back to His plan of simplicity of eating and just living life to an abundance that He has granted us, if we so choose, we have a better understanding of the will of what the Father is, far beyond what we may thought we knew or what we are taught. And this just isn't in religious circles or in church circles, but just in life in general. So if you think about the influence that we're impacted by on a daily basis through mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and all these outlets that we're inundated with 24/7, you really have to stop and ask yourself, what is the Father's will, and do I understand fully what He wants for me? Have I been misled to not fully understand His plan of health for my life? So I begin with these two scriptures, one from the New Testament, one from the Old Testament. And these are by no means to cherry pick, because I do see a continuity here from the beginning to the end, that is Genesis to Revelation, of how to obtain an abundant life in all aspects of our livelihoods. So at Ephesians 5:17, quote, "So then, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of God or Yahweh is," end quote. Hosea 4:6, quote, "For my people perish for lack of knowledge," end quote. So if we know that uh, our ignorance, as we know, ignorance is bliss, but ignorance can always lead us to uh, death or something of an uncontrollable consequence because of our lack thereof of having an understanding or knowledge. So it's our Father's desire for us to be in great health. And this is one of my mantras here, beloved ones. I pray for you to do well in every way, and be in health as your life is doing well. 3 John 2. So what I want to begin what's the problem? And if we can really understand this problem here, and it takes a little bit of digging to understand history as well. And you can really track from the 1800s, and I know we can go well beyond the 1800s, but just if you go back to around 1870, 1880, and you look at the refinement of sugar, of wheat, and other ingredients in our food chain, you can really see how pervasive this has become within the realm of disease and healthcare. So looking at sugar consumption, we can see that presently, this is per person. I want you to understand, this isn't really any individual or a collective group. This is per individual. So sugar consumption is at 160 pounds per person per year. So this is saying that the average person is consuming 160 pounds of sugar per year. That is a ton of sugar. And when you first see these statistics, it might mean like, okay, where or how am I consuming that much? Because when you go to a Walmart or a Target or whatever grocery store, Kroger, Tom Thumb, Whole Foods, Sprouts, Natural Grocers, Central Market that you shop at, and you go on certain aisles and you see the 1 pound bags of granulated sugar. Okay, so I'm not talking about that specifically. I'm talking about the added sugars that comes in our beverages and in our foods that we eat. Sugar is a detrimental variable to our health, as we will see, as it elevates the rise of insulin resistance, leading to type 2 diabetes, which is kind of like the gateway to all known um, underlying health factors: obesity, cardiovascular disease, uh, retinopathy, peripheral neuropathy, end-stage renal disease or kidney failure, fatty liver disease. And there's a great docu-series going on right now, the Fatty Liver docu-series put on by Jonathan Landsman. It's been incredible, a ton of information to learn about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So going on to wheat consumption, this is 146 pounds per person per year. Artificial sweeteners, 142 pounds per person per year. NSAIDs and meds. So this is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. This is your Advils, your ibuprofen, your Aleve, medications, anything that's over the counter. That's what OTC is, or RX, otherwise prescription. Toxins and stress. So when we think about stress, well, what I mean is biochemical, mental, emotional, and physical. So sedentary life, trauma, car accidents, any type of strenuous overexercise, or environmental toxicity in the form of dental fillings, um, any type of chemicals that come through the foods we eat. So this be glyphosate, Roundup, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, arsenic, lead that are tainted in many of the rices that come from the Oriental Eastern world, like China, India, Asia, somewhere over there. These are all individual stressors that load the body. So if any of you have any type of questions, please feel free to put those in the chat section so I can help answer or clarify anything. And I don't see anything yet in my chat section. All I see is me. So please let me know if you can hear me clearly and I'm articulating well. Just say something in the chat section so I know you're there. That way it helps me know that I'm not talking to myself, although that's okay too because I'm recording this. But I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me loud and clear and that y'all are able to access the chat section. So this is a picture that I got from Dr. Alicio Fasano, who's really kind of at the forefront of this leaky gut pandemic. And what I mean by pandemic is that we're under an influence of a chemical onslaught on a daily basis, whether we know it or not. And Dr. Alicio Fasano is headed, I think, at the Harvard medical school or the Mayo Clinic. I can't remember which one. I might be wrong on both. But anyway, this guy is a genius. He kind of discovered zonulin, which is a protein that is released by our body whenever we ingest wheat or gluten-containing products. And so this is the triangle or the triad of health, or also known as autoimmunity. So we've got three factors that all drive toward the autoimmune conditions. And as you can see, we have our genetics, we have leaky gut, and environmental factors. So I really want you guys to either take a screenshot of this or really take a mental snapshot of what this looks like, because this is really going to be at the crux of how we can understand what drives actual autoimmune conditions and why we see such a increase today of autoimmunity within the population. The numbers that we're going to look at, I believe, are way much higher than what we're being told, and I believe this is because of misdiagnosing a person that has an autoimmune disorder. And so at first, I just want to give you guys a picture of the prevalence of obesity and diagnosed diabetes. And remember, this is diagnosed, so we still have to factor in the variable of people who are undiagnosed and or misdiagnosed among United States adults aged 18 years over. So you can see that there's two charts. One is obesity, one is diabetes. Obviously, we define obesity with a body mass index greater than 30 kilograms. And you can see that the year here on the far left, 1994, and you've got the colors, the white referring to no data, you've got the orange as the number climbs, and you've got the more redder colors as the number gets higher. If you fast forward to the year 2000 and 2010, in both conditions of obesity and diabetes, and this is from the CDC, their own website, on the statistics of obesity and diabetes, you can see the trend as the colors aren't getting lighter, but they're getting darker, meaning that the problem is only getting worse. So we really have to factor in back at 2 slides of what's the problem. Sugar consumption, wheat consumption, toxins, stress, artificial sweeteners, and drugs. So this is, again, stats from the Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention. So the top 10 things that are killing us: heart disease is number one. 647,000 lives are taken. Coming in at number two is cancer, 599,000. Accidents, 169,000. Now, this wasn't a specific label of accidents. It's just deemed accidents. Now, I found an article that was very interesting in the British Medical Journal in 2016 of May, saying that 700 people died each day due to medical accidents alone. So this is people dying under a physician's care in a hospital daily, 700 people under a medical accident. That is unbelievable. And if we look at chronic lower respiratory disease, 160,000 people. Now, we're coming into a very unique time where we have this so-called coronavirus pandemic and this scare from the media that are really putting uh, a damper down on the population to control people who were otherwise exhibiting certain symptoms of flu-like behavior or respiratory or sinusitis infections. And it's a really hard subject to tackle. My approach is, if you take care of yourself, do the right thing, get adequate sunshine, hydrate yourself, really boost your immune system by eating the right foods, staying away from donuts and the processed fast foods like Big Macs and Taco Bell and Whoppers from Burger King, but eat whole, real foods, and we should be okay. Get the right amount of exercise, and if we look at stroke coming in at number 5, 146,000 deaths, and then Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's just recently surpassed type 2 diabetes as the number 6th all-time leading cause at 121,000. So 250 million Americans over the age of 40 have been diagnosed with at least one chronic disease. Now, that's I have in all caps here unacceptable, because that's what it is. It truly is unacceptable. So I think that's the United States population is roughly 327 million people. So that's 70% of the population that is diagnosed with at least one chronic disease. And this is at the age of 40. Now, I'm 34 years old. I don't look forward to coming to the age of 40 to being diagnosed with some type of chronic disease. So how do we prevent? And that's what this PowerPoint presentation is here to cover. It's how we can learn to prevent disease and stay away from it, so we never have to worry about the stress having disease puts on not only ourselves, but that of our family members as well. So these are some quick facts that I've gathered for you. 30.3 million people have diabetes in the United States. That's 9.5% of the population. Now, what's more scarier is 84 million adults, and look at the age that this starts at, 18 or older, have prediabetes. So prediabetes would be someone having a fasting blood glucose. This is known as like your hemoglobin A1C of 5.7. This is a diagnosable condition known as prediabetes. 33, almost 34% of the population has this condition unknowingly, so asymptomatic, not presenting any symptoms. And then I want to get into a little bit of information about our baby boomer generation and why this is so important, and Alzheimer's disease. As we've seen from the slide previously right here, that Alzheimer's disease comes in as the 6th leading cause of death, taking 121,000 lives a year. Now, by the year 2029, the baby boomer generation will be 65 years and older. Now, I want you to think about this, because the baby boomer generation started from 1946 and ran to about the year 1967. So this gap of years here takes altogether the people who are known as this baby boomer generation. And by the year 2029, this entire group of people will be 65 years and older. And we need to understand why that's so important, because 20% of the United States population will be 65 years old. This is showing that data from the U.S. Census Bureau are showing that there's 76 million baby boomers currently. And again, Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. Now, to put this into perspective, 1 in 3 seniors, 65 and older, dies with Alzheimer's disease or some type of dementia. Alzheimer's disease kills more than breast and prostate cancer combined. Now, we know that there's this fear around breast and prostate cancer, and I think we're starting to overlook Alzheimer's and dementia until we get up closer to having some sort of early onset cognitive decline with memory problems, where we really start to struggle with remembering things, planning things, and we can actually tangibly see the manifestation of some sort of cognitive decline. And what I want to teach and advocate for is how we can properly take care of ourselves so we don't have to actually wait up until the time we get a diagnosis of such a detrimental condition before we want to really take matters into our own hands. Approximately 6 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's disease. And by the year 2050, this number is expected to rise to nearly 14 million. So that's 50%, more than 50% more than what it's at right now. And I think, again, that number is a lot higher than what we're seeing being presented to us by these governmental entities. So every 65 seconds, someone in the United States actually develops this disease. So I've been on this webinar now for 30 minutes. And you can imagine that there's already been 30 people that's been diagnosed, or not diagnosed, but that's developed this disease just in this presentation alone. 1 out of every 10 people age 65 and older has a form of a dementia, neurodegenerative disease, or an Alzheimer's condition. So what I want to really harp on here now is that in Alzheimer's disease and a dementia are being categorized under the autoimmune umbrella. And we're going to get into why that is and how our environmental lifestyle choices can actually contribute to these factors. So, could it really be that diet and lifestyle are the key to a wholesome, healthy life? Now, I've got here, it's so easy that a caveman can do it. If you remember from the Geico commercials, this man right here that they made fun of. And if you look at the caption that I placed above, we have the keto diet, the paleo diet, the Mediterranean diet, the bulletproof diet, the Atkins diet, the South Beach diet, a Weight Watchers diet. There's so many different diets out there. If you go onto Amazon or Google and you just type in a diet book or a nutrition book, there's over 40,000 results. And it's no wonder why we see so many people that are overwhelmed with what type of diet to choose. And it's because there's so much confusion, especially when the media gets involved in this, that we don't know really what to do. Now, I believe wholeheartedly that it's a bio-individual approach. What do I mean by that? So it's personalized healthcare. We have to really dig deep on each individual person to find out not only their history of how they got to where they are right now in their current health challenge, but it begins prenatally. So we have to look at the parents' health to kind of get a better roadmap to a person's healing journey, to understand what drove the person to maybe get the disease or the condition or the challenge that they're possibly going through currently. And I say that because I look at when a person is in the womb, in development, in utero, there's so many variables that are at stake from the parents that can contribute to the developing fetus to be born into a world of either a flourishing health or adverse challenges of a person's health. And so I want you to look at this graphic here. There's over 100 different types of autoimmune disorders. So if we look at these autoimmune diseases, we've got certain types that afflict the brain, such as multiple sclerosis or autism. We've got Hashimoto's and Graves that attack the thyroid. We've got rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis that attack the bones. We have, again, rheumatoid arthritis and ankylosing spondylitis that attack the muscles. We've got psoriasis, scleroderma, eczema, vitiligo that attack the skin. Fibromyalgia, which I think attacks way more than just the lungs. It's chronic pain anywhere in the body. And then we've got the peripheral neuropathy, retinal neuropathy, diabetic neuropathy, and multiple sclerosis and ALS. These things not only attack the brain, but the nerve and the nervous system are heavily associated with the brain. The GI tract, we have ulcerative colitis, type 1 diabetes, celiac disease, and Crohn's. And then lupus doesn't not only attack the blood, but can attack the skin, the joints, and the liver. And this is also known as autoimmune hepatitis. So we've got over 100 different types of autoimmune. And if you remember that I had said Alzheimer's disease and dementia are actually being categorized under the autoimmune umbrella. So we can factor those two in as well. So what is autoimmunity? Let's look at Autoimmunity 101. So it is a pandemic. It's a very severe condition. And if we take all of the 80 plus autoimmune disorders and lump them into one category, it actually ranks in as the top 10 in deaths among women of all ages. And I say women because women are more so affected by autoimmunity than men. I'm not saying that men are exempt from having an autoimmune condition, but what I am saying is that women are primarily more affected by an autoimmune than men are. The National Institutes of Health estimate that it affects nearly 24 million Americans. So I want you to remember that number right there, because I'm going to show you on the next slide that the Autoimmune Foundation actually says it's more than that. So to put this into a greater perspective, in contrast, there is about 13 million people affected with cancer. So this is why we understand that it's truly an epidemic or a pandemic, and it's increasing. And it's a very misunderstood condition. But to see that 24 million Americans are affected nearly by an autoimmune disease, and that cancer roughly affects 13 million, that's double the stats there. We really have to start taking matters into our own hands and become a advocate or a CEO of our own health, really. And this is where it really gets exciting, because we can control autoimmunity if we understand how to and what the triggers are that contribute to this condition, so we can reverse the progression of an autoimmune disorder. So again, this is where I'd said to remember that number from this previous slide here, that the National Institutes of Health estimated that 24 million Americans are affected. So the American Autoimmune Related Diseases Association, you can go to the aarda.org, and they actually say that this number is to be estimated that over 50 million Americans suffer from an autoimmune disease alone. And I think it's because of the people who go misdiagnosed. There's so many people who really don't understand how this autoimmune mechanism works. And so they get misdiagnosed with something else that's unrelated, and they don't really get put under the autoimmune umbrella. Therefore, this number isn't really where it should be. So researchers have concluded that the presence of environmental factors such as stress, and if you remember that we define stress as mental, emotional, so this could be job-related stress, marital stress, or relationship stress, financial stress, worry, anxiety, and then we have viruses, we have sedentary lifestyles, wrecks like car accidents and of the like can also create, this is traumatic stress on the body. So the body responds to stress in the exact same way. It doesn't see stress as, it all perceives stress as the same condition, and it'll respond to it in the same manner. And so we have viruses, as you know, the coronavirus that puts a stress on the body, and that can create an immune response. Obviously, there's many more viruses than just the coronavirus, but there's bacteria, and you'll see on my wife's test results up here that I'm going to share with you soon. And then medications. We talked about this earlier. Hormones. So hormones also play a huge role because there is what we know as xenoestrogens and obesogens that I'll touch on later. And then your body has to detoxify hormone metabolites like estrogens out of the body. And if they can't do so properly, they can actually cause an autoimmune response. And then toxins. These all can trigger these autoimmune responses in genetically susceptible people. So if you remember the triangle that I showed you earlier in the presentation, that genetics that you're born with, that you're given to by your parents, or if you think of the term epigenetics, it's a exploding field of research. Epi means outside or above. So this is outside factors having a role on our genetics to express themselves in either a negative or a positive manner. So it's been said that our genes are what load the gun, but it's our environment that we're exposed to on a daily basis that actually pulls the trigger for our genes to express themselves in either a negative or positive way. So conventional medicine has really very few answers, and they treat these very complex disorders as, quote, incurable genetic diseases, end quote, that require a lifetime of bioidentical or just, normal hormone replacement therapy, anti-inflammatory drugs, or immunosuppressive medications. And one such immune suppressing drug was Humira. And in 2012 and 2013, this was the most profitable drug on the market. It brought in $9.3 billion. And so it would be an understatement to say that the autoimmune pandemic that we see going on has really become a very profitable industry for big pharma. And that's really sad to say because, it's as the old cliche goes, profits over the people. Well, why don't we take in consideration the people rather than making a dime off at the expense of a person's health condition? I highly disagree with that. And it's just very saddening that that is a fact that we have to deal with. Um, So again, researchers have found that all autoimmune conditions are really essentially the same process occurring in the body. And this means that the immune system is really going under an inflammatory response. It's highly inflamed, and it's under the strain of continual triggers that mistakes healthy tissue as foreign, meaning it looks at it as an enemy and begins to destroy it. So the only difference between the various autoimmune conditions is which organ is being attacked. And we talked briefly about this earlier, but I wanted to get into it a little bit more so you can see this on paper. Lupus, with this condition, it could be your skin, it could be the liver, or it could be the joints. And what's unique is when one person is diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, really, this person could have multiple autoimmune conditions rather than just one. So we see lupus can actually be intertwined with scleroderma, vitiligo, or psoriasis, autoimmune hepatitis, and or rheumatoid arthritis-like conditions. It's very hard, but what we have to do is investigate thoroughly to the underlying root cause of a person's condition to figure out why their body is overreacting in such a manner that is leading to an autoimmune condition. Obviously, type 1 diabetes is the pancreas's inability to pump out insulin to remove sugar from the bloodstream. With multiple sclerosis or MS, it's the brain and the spinal cord. That is your central nervous system. Ulcerative colitis, it's the large intestine in the colon, and this can actually lead to prostate and colon cancer. And in the case of Hashimoto's and Graves' disease, your thyroid gland is going to be the obvious target. And just a little bit to understand about the hypothalamus and the pituitary that signals the hormones to tell the thyroid to pump out its hormone to control the metabolism of the body. So the pituitary gland is located at the base of the brain under the hypothalamus, and this releases the various hormones, and it plays significant roles in regulating the balance within the endocrine system, which what I like to call is the control tower over your entire body. So hormones are really just chemical messengers that get distributed throughout the bloodstream. They're like the mailmen or the couriers that take a message from one organ or gland and deliver it to another organ or gland to really take that message into the cell of a person to tell that cell the job it's supposed to do for a person to be able to function at an optimal level. And so we have many different axes of this hypothalamus and pituitary system. We have ones that act on the adrenal glands, the thyroid glands, and the ovary and testicle systems as well, the reproductive systems. So if we think during a stress response, what the pituitary gland will actually do is release a hormone called the adrenocorticotropic hormone, which will actually modulate a heavy regulated stress response that includes our adrenal glands, which will pump out the cortisol, which is our main hormone. So, what I want you guys and gals to think about is the physiological aspects of the stress response on the body through this um, endocrine, endocrine controlled or mediated response system. This signaling pathway is what I want you to understand. So, if we were to think of the airplane and the control tower that speak to one another to tell the airplane where its flight is going to take off and land and how many messengers are inside the plane to get to its destination. That's kind of like the control system, if you will. We got the passengers who are the hormones, and we got the main signaling hormone that's the plane being sent by the air traffic control tower to its destination from its point of takeoff. So we can really see where all of this can affect within the body. It's all one interconnected system. So we might have motility issues, brain fog and cloudy thinking, a quality of sleep and mood. We might have nerve tissue health. We might have a pancreas, such as pancreatic enzymes, that could lead to, let's say, endocrine function or thyroid function, adrenal, stress, and sex hormones. We've got mucosal surface integrity. So that is your gut, where I believe personally the foundation of health really begins. This can involve your fat and protein and carbohydrate metabolism, the energy of your cells and your muscles, your sugar balance or imbalance. And then we got the eicosanoid modulation, that is your omega-3 to 6 ratio, which can either create a pro or anti-inflammatory state. And these are all codependent on the types of foods and lifestyles that we live. And then we have our liver, which I think is a very underappreciated organ. It's the largest internal organ of our body that I think has and serves the biggest role of our body in terms of the detox capacity, but also over 500 different jobs or responsibilities that it has to do. So we can talk about heavy metal detoxification. We can talk about oxidative stress, cholesterol production, the many enzymes the liver produces, or the conjugation of pharmaceuticals and drugs and supplements we take and foods and the blood it filters. It's a huge, complex process, but as man tends to get in the way, obviously we tend to mess things up and overcomplicate things. So we have to get back to the simple design that our Heavenly Father and Creator has given us. I don't want this whole presentation to be about the hypothalamus and the endocrine system. We can do that for another one. But what I want to talk about really more is it chemicals and not calories? And what do I mean by that? Because that's kind of a bold statement in terms of I truly believe counting calories is such a myth and a flawed system, and it stresses out a lot of people. Calories in, calories out does not work, and a lot of people still adhere to that model. What I want to articulate or convey to you is that I believe the biggest thing conventional and alternative medicine is missing is the chemical aspect. Autoimmunity affects any organ system. So look at all these boxes here. We've already covered a lot of these in the previous slides, but thyroid disorders, Hashimoto's, infertility, asthma. I was diagnosed with asthma at 4 years old. I've reversed that. I don't have any asthma at all, unless it's induced by dietary factors like wheat. I'm non-celiac gluten sensitive. Heart disease, so cardiovascular, atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease, heart attacks, cancers, learning disabilities, so ADD, ADHD, autism, weight gain and obesity, or weight loss resistance, something that my wife can speak to. Gut dysbiosis. That just simply means that we've got more pathogenic bacteria that are overpopulating our good bacteria, leading to things like chronic fatigue and pain, and which really open up the gateway, in my opinion, to overall health in both a good or bad effect. And then birth defects. I said this and I'll say it again, that constant yet unaware exposure to environmental toxins is, I believe, the biggest missing piece of the alternative health puzzle. So let's dive into this a little bit deeper. So this is kind of the landscape of toxins here, and I really want you to pay attention to this because this really hits home for many of us. If not, it should, and it can be very overwhelming. So take pictures of these, screenshot these, whatever you need to do. I really hope you can take notes. So within the United States, there's 84,000 chemicals registered for use. And right now, there's approximately 40,000 of these 84,000 chemicals in our environment being used. Here's where it gets scary. Roughly 200 of these have adequate safety data. So what that means is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the FDA, and these other government entities don't regulate this market very strenuously, meaning that these chemicals can be released onto the market before having enough safety data on them, allowing them to do so. So prior to 2016, there was no requirement that chemicals be tested for safety prior to going onto the market. And it's 2020, it's only been 4 years. So can you imagine that there's 40,000 plus chemicals currently in use that we're exposed to in the air we breathe, the things that we drink, and the things that we consume in our food. Center for Disease Control has measured more than 300 chemicals in the U.S. population. Pesticides, heavy metals, and heavy metals being mercury, lead, and arsenic, cadmium, thallium, non-stick chemicals, flame retardants. Now, I really want you guys to pay attention and understand flame retardants, because curtains, furniture, blankets, mattresses, even your toddlers and newborn and infant clothings that you purchase, if you look on the tag inside the clothing, will say it either has or does not contain flame retardant chemical additives in the clothing. Now, I just want to ask you, and this is going to sound really bad. If I don't even want to say if your child were to catch on fire in a flame retardant onesie or nightie, or even in a blanket, do you really think it's going to protect your toddler if he were to be lit on fire? No, no. And these are major endocrine disrupting chemicals that are leaching into our kids. through their skin and ourselves. So jet fuel and plastic compounds such as BPA and phthalates. So this is a really scary statistic here. So from the womb to the tomb, and you heard me earlier talking about being in utero and doing a very intensive workup on a person's health history, going all the way back to prenatal. So in 2009, the Environmental Working Group, you can go to the website there at ewg.org. They got a lot of great articles and studies and health guides that you can download for free. They conducted a study where they examined the umbilical cord blood of 10 newborns, and they found that these babies began life exposed to as many as 287 of the 413 toxic chemicals that they looked at in the study. There was an average of 200 toxins that were found per baby. And out of these 200, 217 were neurotoxic, meaning they affected the central nervous system and the brain. 180 of these chemicals that were found in the baby or newborn's umbilical cord blood are known carcinogens, or they were caused to cause cancer. Sorry, I was checking the group chat here, and my wife says to please check the tag. Okay. So cancer rates in children, this is a scary stat. Cancer rates in children have risen 67% since 1950. Not only that, childhood obesity has tripled since the 70s. So are we going forward in our health or backward? And what has our current healthcare model done? And this is where it gets more scary. Excuse me. According to the Columbia University School of Public Health, 95% of cancer is caused by diet and environment. So we must look at what we're exposed to in our environment and what's in our diet, really in order to see what we're doing to ourselves. Because if we don't, how is it that we're going to live a wholesome, abundant, healthy life that our Creator has given to us? Now, obviously, we can't go around in a bubble, but we have to be aware of what we're exposing ourselves to, and really just control what we can control, because I understand that this can become very overwhelming. But I want to bring people to this awareness and inspire people to take action for their lives, so that way they can enjoy life to the greatest fulfillment that they deserve. So I want to talk briefly about these obesogens and what obesogens are. I can hear my son. He's calling at me. Might come in here. I'll have him say hi. So obesogens were a term coined in 2006. So an obesogen is a chemical that directly or indirectly increases obesity through disruption of a metabolic, hormonal, or a developmental process. And they have the ability to alter fat cell development. It has the ability to alter metabolism and promote the retention of fat in the body. So this is where resistant weight loss comes into effect. So this is despite the very healthy organic diet you're eating and the exercise that you're doing every day or 3 days a week, or it all has a link to play into your health. And I've actually linked at the bottom of this slide here for you to go to reference this article that I'm putting. So I'm just not making this up on my own. And what you see is that this is a quote from this article, and it says that many in the medical and exercise physiology establishment, they remain to this ideology that poor diet and lack of exercise as the sole cause of obesity. But researchers are gathering convincing evidence of chemical, quote, obesogens, this being dietary, pharmaceutical drugs, and environmental chemicals that may alter your body's process and predispose some people to gain weight or get other detrimental diseases like cognitive decline and cancers. And so I want to name off some of these types of chemicals that are labeled as obesogens. And I know that you may not understand these, and just type them in your question box, and I'll answer these as best as I can. But we've got organophosphate insecticides, organochlorine pesticides. If you remember back in the 60s and 70s, the chemical DDT that was sprayed, much like Roundup is. We have, like I've already mentioned, the flame retardants. We've got bisphenol A, which is a plasticizer found in many plastics. And then we've got phthalates, we have atrazine, we have nicotine, arsenic, dioxins, PAHs, which is a compound that can be created from grilling foods. And then we have MSG, monosodium glutamate. So these are just some of the ones that I had named off just now again. Heavy metals, lead, mercury. So if you were, I'm pretty sure people listening in or that will view this, those that were living in homes before 1978 or were born in that baby boomer generation were known as the lead generation. Everything was in lead, from the paint to the gasoline. And then mercury. Mercury is another known neurotoxic chemical to affect developing children in the womb. And that's why we see autism on the rise. And just as a mental note, if we stay on this current pace, by the year 2032, 1 in 2 boys will be on the autism spectrum. That is absolutely absurd. And we need to have some type of an awakening response to this. How many of you know a family or have a child who is on the autism spectrum? One thing that I like to do is run an organic acids test on these children because it really provides a lot of clues on a child to show the disruption, kind of to give a snapshot of what's going on in the brain and to look at all of these disrupted pathways and really to look at their gut too, because most times their neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine are heavily imbalanced. They're loaded with heavy metals and toxic chemicals, and they've got a very disrupted gut and multiple food sensitivities that are all contributing to these problems. Am I saying that I can cure autism by knowing this? No. Am I saying that I can reverse it? I can say that what we can do is certainly help put autism or maybe hinder the damaging effects that autism does to a child if we can pinpoint and locate where the dysfunction is coming into play. That's what I'm really trying to say. So here's some information about what phthalates are. Phthalates are known as a plasticizer and a solvent found in adhesives. I mean, these are virtually everywhere. They're ubiquitous in our environment, in all of our fragrances, any of our healthcare products, most all of beauty products, cosmetics, vinyl flooring, PVC pipe, and almost all of children's toys, especially children's toys that come from China, and many medical supplies. These can interfere with testosterone levels. And I want to note that you see low T clinics for men popping up everywhere like Starbucks. And the problem with many allopathic doctors and these clinics is that they're treating numbers on paper. So what they're doing is they're looking and measuring numbers on test results, and they're supplying pharmaceutical drugs or natural supplements to just alter the numbers on the paper, but they're not really still investigating to get to the root cause of why a person's numbers are altered. You can see that phthalates can alter normal thyroid function as well as other hormones in the body, and that they're heavily linked to obesity and type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. So go with your gut instincts. And I say this because we're going to start getting into my wife's story here. So your gut ecology, the garden in your gut starts at birth. The bacterial colonization during and shortly after birth plays a major role in the formation of that garden that goes down on in your gut. And I want to name some of the factors that can actually affect that community down there in your gut. Premature birth, C-section versus vaginal birth, and breast milk versus commercial formula. And I know a lot of this is controversial if you don't know this or are uneducated, but this is what I'm here to help you do, is become more educated in this area so you can make the most healthy decisions for you and your family, especially for your kids. Premature infants are colonized principally by the Clostridium difficile bacteria, and we actually see this Clostridium species heavily correlated in children with autism or autism-like disorders, sensory degradation order, and Asperger's syndrome. So infants who were born vaginally were colonized mostly by bacterial communities similar to the mother's vagina, such as the lactobacillus and the healthy Prevotella. Uh, what's really interesting here is that C-section born infants were colonized by bacteria found on the skin surface, such as staph and the Cornicobacterium. And you're going to see this in my wife. My wife was born C-section. So I want to name off some common causes of what a leaky gut is, and I'm going to show you some pictures of a leaky gut. So, and I'm going to try to breeze on through these very quickly here because we're kind of getting into closing. So inflammatory bowel disease, I already said NSAID use, Aleve and ibuprofen, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, also known as SIBO, celiac disease, chronic alcoholism, over-exercising, increase in age, food sensitivities, gut infections like H. pylori, Giardia, Cryptosporidium parvum, Blastocystis hominis, heavy metals like lead, arsenic, mercury, cadmium, and such, and nutritional deficiencies like vitamin B12, vitamin B6, CoQ10, vitamin D, also prolonged stress, mental, emotional, the financial stress, the job-related stress, inflammation, leaky gut, and autoimmune disease. And I've got these 3 columns here, and you'll see a red box around certain words, and that's because all of these are cross-reactive with one another through a process known as molecular mimicry. So common sources of inflammation: dairy, corn, gluten, non-gluten grains being amaranth, buckwheat, millet, quinoa, sorghum, and such. We got alcohol, processed foods, and refined sugar, obviously. Common triggers for leaky gut are gluten, non-gluten grains, and corn. So those cross-react with the same common sources of inflammation and the same of the autoimmune triggers. They all cross-react one another because they all look very similar in their molecular structure or their chemistry. And you can see that the list on there. So these are all intercorrelated with each other. So this is a picture from Dr. Alicio Fasano. This is actually the inside of what a gut or the intestinal lining looks like of the small intestine. So you've got all these little jiggly puffs with the little shag-like carpet haircut or the sea anemones. And I'll go on to a little bit more simplified picture courtesy of Dr. Jockers here. So leaky gut syndrome, and he has some of the triggers that can actually cause this intestinal damage. Dietary proteins, low stomach acid and enzymes, that being digestive enzymes, proteolase, lipase, trypsin, and others. We've got gut infections, antibiotics. We've got blood sugar issues, antibodies, stress, food allergies, toxins, menopause, and yes, pregnancy. So you see that there's these on the left normal tight junctions. You got these 3 lines that are kind of keeping the stomach held together tightly, and then you've got that arrow that's separating the ones on the right, allowing for it to be opened. And then directly underneath, you see that bloodstream there, and those little red cough drop looking things. Those are red blood cells. That's your immune system. So what happens is things fall down into the bloodstream directly beneath the gut lining, and your immune system begins to attack because it sees things that falls through that shouldn't, and it identifies that as a bad guy. So this is another picture courtesy of Dr. Jockers, and he talks about your intestinal flora, which is the ecology, the garden in your gut, and how it affects your health. So bad gut microbes, otherwise bad bacteria overpopulating the good guys on the block, equals increased inflammation, equals poor quality of life. And you can see the different factors there of how it affects your health with autism, inflammation, obesity, metabolism, vitamins, and immunity. This is courtesy of Dr. Silverman's gut matrix that he talks about. And this is how the gut and the brain, this bi-directional pathway on how you might have heard your gut being called your second brain, how it talks to many other systems within the body, and how when you have a leaky gut, how it affects these other systems that we just talked about in the body. So the thyroid, your thyroid hormone levels go down, you can present with Hashimoto's disease. Chemicals in the brain go down, so the feelings of satiety, not being full, and you get inflammatory neurodegeneration. If you remember earlier, I had said that autoimmune diseases or Alzheimer's and dementia are now falling under the category of autoimmunity. Body composition, so obesity, liver dysfunction, toxins and chemical overload because they're coming through and placing a heavier burden on the liver and its function to detoxify these chemicals on top of what it already has to do, allowing a sluggish liver, slowing the metabolism, leading to things like chronic fatigue syndrome and chronic pain. So this is a really interesting article that I found off of PubMed, and at the top right there, you'll see that I have given the link for you to go back and research that. This comes from the British Medical Journal of 1936. Very interesting. Nutrition in Health and Disease. So I kind of pulled up this box here that pulls a snippet from this article, and they say, what is nutrition? It is the fundamental function on which the condition of the body, that is to say, health, depends. So food is the instrument of nourishment, and nutrition is the act of using it. And this comes from the same article. They say, well, what factors actually affect nutrition? And we know that nutrition depends on a number of these factors. So this being the constitution of the food, is it non-GMO? Is it processed? Is it fast food? How many added sugars? Is it organic? Chemicals. What chemicals are in this food? And then the efficiency of the processes of the bodily systems. So how good is your body at digestion, absorption, assimilation, circulation, and excretion of these foods you're putting in? Well, if you're loading your body up with a bunch of processed, added sugars, non-organic, chemical-laden foods, you're going to actually disrupt the efficiency of these bodily systems that involve the digestion, absorption, and assimilation, slowing the circulation and excretion of these heavily toxic foods in your body, furthering the disease process. So also proper exercise of the body and rest, stress reduction, and this includes freedom from worry and our emotional status, as we've touched on quite a bit so far. I love this quote here. It's by Dr. Andrew Saul. He says, don't bother looking in the history books for what has slaughtered the most Americans. Instead, look at your dinner table. We eat too much of the wrong things and not enough of the right things. And so diet-induced autoimmunity, you know, over the last 100 years, or I should say 50 years, food has undergone such considerable transformation. There's been new strains of grains, such as wheat, rice, soy, and corn. The United States has more genetically modified crops than the rest of the world combined. I learned that from Dr. Jill Carnahan. Chemical use with pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and insecticides. Dairy cows are now injected with hormones, which get into the milk we drink. Why is that a factor? Because think about it. The subsidies that farmers get from the government to increase the supply and demand, ultimately to increase profits. You inject hormones into a cow to produce a bigger cow, to produce more production of milk. They get more profit. Obviously, the chemicals injected affect the consumer. Chemical ingredients in our foods, artificial preservatives, food colorings, and flavorings. I actually was at Albertsons earlier buying a 6-pack of Zevia root beer, and I took a picture of Hostess donuts, and I'm going to post this later on our Facebook group here. How many of you used to eat powdered, sugared Hostess donuts? They were my favorite, whether they were Hostess or Mrs. Baird's. Oh my goodness, I loved these things. Anyway, on the back of the box, the ingredients, there's an ingredient here known as sodium aluminum phosphate. This is a food additive as a salt that's heavily laden with a heavy metal known as aluminum. That's very much correlated through study of, yeah, heavily correlated with dementia and Alzheimer's. Aluminum is. It's in many other things too. And then heavy metals such as arsenic and the CAFOs, that is feed organizations for cattle lots where they store cattle and chickens and turkey. And I have hogs there because I know a lot of people think it's okay to eat sustainably raised hogs, although it's unpermissible by the Bible. Our Creator directs us not to eat these because these were deemed to be garbage cleaners of the earth. I don't care. I could dress up and fry a dog turd and give it to you and dress it up with the right stuff, but because it tastes good doesn't mean it's food. Widespread use of antibiotics, antacids, proton pump inhibitors such as Nexium and Zantac 75, and Prilosec, histamine 2 blockers, and other drugs which can be bought over the counter adds to what we consume and must be detoxified by the liver, but in conjunction with all of the above, places a burden on our immune system and our liver's ability to detoxify. So this is a really good exercise that my wife had a lot of women do at a retreat here recently. And this is the total toxic body burden, as I was talking about earlier. So we're made up of over 70 trillion cells. Each of these cells have this bucket. Now, I really want you to think about this because this bucket can be bigger in some people and smaller than others, depending on our genetics. And so it's an accumulative process over time of how much our bucket fills up with an endotoxin and exotoxins. So meaning toxins that are produced inside of us on a natural physiological level, or toxins that we take in from the outside, whether it's the type of chemical latherings we put on ourselves through lotions, Bath and Body Works, Bed Bath and Beyond, Victoria's Secret, colognes, Ralph Lauren, Polo, Tommy Hilfiger, and I used to absolutely love colognes, although I no longer wear those. If I want to smell like anything, I'll put on essential oils, as there's over 80 different essential oils listed off in the Bible, and we can go over that too in another webinar if you'd like. And so what happens is your bucket fills up over time and overflows as disease, obviously manifesting itself in autoimmune conditions, neurodegenerative disease, and cancer. So what the goal is to do is to identify these toxins, these hidden stressors, and to lower the total toxic burden of the body so that we may be able to detoxify and heal. And I wanted you guys to know because there is every 57 seconds someone dies of cancer, and that equates to 1,600 deaths per day from cancer alone. So this is what it looks like. Inflammation, that's your bucket, fills up from toxins, from trauma, from infection. And you can see all of these boxes that these arrows are pointing to: brain fog, fatigue, headaches, digestive problems, blood pressure, muscle joint pain, etc. Is your bucket overflowing? So this was my wife. As we started to begin our healing journey, or hers, I think overall, health really begins in your mouth, because after all, that's where you breathe in and out of, aside from your nose, and you pummel food all day long, hopefully not, into your mouth. So you can see in the top left that I have in a green circle the infected root canal that my wife had extracted. You have in the Other green circles, those are cysts that were living in my wife's jawbones from improperly removed wisdom teeth. Fun fact, 80% of people who have had their wisdom teeth removed have cavitations. Now, they may not have these cysts, but they do have cavitations. I just had mine removed in January this year, and I had 3. And I had my wisdom teeth removed when I was 17 years old, and I'm 34. So 17 years ago, and I've had anaerobic bacteria creating low-grade chronic inflammation all this time. Now, sure, someone might be presenting no symptoms, but as life goes on and these things again accumulate, filling up that toxic bucket, and eventually you can't handle anymore and it spills over and leads to conditions like my wife, who probably had Hashimoto's and probably ulcerative colitis or Crohn's and other types of conditions. I just never took her to a conventional doctor to receive a formal diagnosis. So I can't say if she did or did not. But by all of the symptoms that she did present with, I can make an accurate assumption, but I'm not going to say. So down in the bottom left is Dr. Lane Freeman, who did a procedure. You can see my wife in the hazmat suit with the ventilation duct right next to her mouth to have her mercury fillings, which, by the way, she had 8 in her mouth that off gas and go directly to your brain as you breathe them in. And these are stimulated to off gas every day whenever you chew food, eat food, brush your teeth, drink teas, hot liquids like coffee and such. So this is her detox test before her procedure, and this was using a spectrophotometer known as the oligoscan. You can see that aluminum right here was way off the charts. And you heard me talk about the Hostess donuts that had aluminum in them. Other things like cooking with aluminum, baked potatoes, placing anything in any aluminum pans increases your risk of aluminum exposure. Also, Dove, Secret, Old Spice, Speed Stick, and many of these deodorants have aluminum particles in them because they block the pores in the body from perspirating, from sweating. You can see mercury, cadmium, all these other lead, thallium, very high. This is another test that I ran on her after she had her mercury amalgams removed. Now you see mercury is not presenting, but thallium is really high. Now there's some things to be said about this, in that one, metals come out in the urine, they come out in the hair, they come out in feces, and so what we saw before may not all show up here. And I had to use a provoking agent known as DMSA, which is a chelation agent that pulls metals out of tissue and sends it through the liver and the kidneys to be excreted in the urine. Finally, one thing that I think is affecting more people than they know is mold. And you can see this was our bathroom, and we lived in this mold-infested house for 8 years. And that's black mold, whether it's aspergillus or Stachybotrys, I'm not sure because I didn't have it tested. I just found it. And it wasn't not only in our bathroom, but both bathrooms, under the kitchen floor, and behind all the cabinetry in the kitchen sink and dishwasher within the kitchen. And I believe that mold is a major hidden epidemic that is crippling people left and right today. And one of the unique things that I think many people overlook is that mold, the first written record of it, you might see it written in as a plague or leprosy, is in Leviticus 14. And our Heavenly Father tells us what to do when we have a mold exposure. And you can also confer Deuteronomy 28:22. And sometimes we don't even know that we have it. And that's what the scary thing is. We have these mystery symptoms and conditions that present, and nobody factors in to think that it's not a mold issue because they can't see it. And mold puts off these volatile organic compounds known as mycotoxins. So you can think as mycotoxins as mold poop. You can't see them, and they get released into the air, and you breathe them in, and you can actually have these growing in your lungs, your digestive tract, your nasal cavity, and they do some very detrimental things to your health. And we'll cover that much deeper in another webinar. So when nothing seems to be helping you get better, you better test your house for mold, or we can run an organic acids test and find if you might have a possible mold exposure through food or through your home. So this is the test I ran on my wife known as the GI map. And it's a very comprehensive stool test. And it looks at many different things, such as the health of her microbiome or that garden down in her gut. And you can see here, remember she was born C-section and she has the staphylococcus very high, along with strep very high, and bacillus. And these are opportunistic bacteria that cause dysbiosis, meaning that you have more good guys. I'm sorry, more bad guys in population than you do good guys. This will result in many autoimmune triggers and conditions. And we see down here the Citrobacter, very high. And then we have H. pylori flagged very high. And then we got the Clostridia. It's pretty high too. And then we have a parasite that's very nasty with Giardia. So my wife has some things that are going on that can be contributing to a lot of her health conditions. Now, this is why I don't look at symptoms, nor do I treat symptoms. I look at dysfunction within the body of a person, and I investigate very thoroughly using these advanced functional lab tests to identify hormonal imbalances, um, digestive issues, immune system disorders, detoxification issues, which also in turn goes into energy production and nervous system. So we have to be thinking and looking at this level in order to really understand what can be going on with these hidden stressors that we otherwise might overlook and not really know that are there or might not see. H. pylori is known to cause gastric cancer, peptic ulcers, and can be causing all kinds of other issues like constipation and bloating and gas. And a lot of people don't know that they have these, but according to scientific literature, 50% of the world's population has some problem or overgrowth with H. pylori. So this is another graphic courtesy of Dr. Jockers showing the H. pylori bacteria right here. It's got this flagellated, these little tails that you can see here like a squid. It can cause heartburn, GERD, acid reflux, upper abdominal pain, indigestion, constipation, gastritis, carcinoma or cancer, migraines, acne. And I'm closing out here, and I really want to say, what does our Creator tell us about food? What does God, the Almighty of the universe, Yahweh, tell us about food? So in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, these are the instructions that we can go back to and find for our benefit. And I believe in the totality of the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. I believe in the Savior, the Messiah. I don't believe that anything has changed. I believe that there might be some things that could differ, but I can explain on that, or you can go to my YouTube channel, Torah Messiah, to get better understandings of that. But here he tells us not to eat the unclean food and lists them in detail. It's not to the fat or the blood of an animal or animals sacrificed to idols, not to eat animals that have been drugged, not to eat poison or toxic plants, not to eat chemical-laden foods, hybridized foods, and not to eat processed foods. And the earth suffers for the sins of its people, for they have twisted God Almighty or Yahweh's instructions, and we have violated his laws and broken his everlasting covenant. And you can convert Isaiah 24:5 for this. And yes, we live in a fallen world, and we live in a world full of sin. And we have to take action and be responsible for ourselves and our family and our lives of our children, to teach them in the way that we're instructed to, so that they will not depart from it as they grow up. So what the Bible tells us about food, Yahweh said, here, throughout the whole earth, I'm giving you as food every seed-bearing plant and every tree with seed-bearing fruit. I'm not advocating for veganism or vegetarianism, because he does give us in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy either 14 or 16 the animals that were permitted to eat and not eat. Fruits, nuts, seeds, sea vegetables as kelp, seaweed, legumes, cheese, eggs, organic, free-range, non-animal fed byproducts, honey in its raw form, clean meats, grass-fed, grass-finished in small amounts a few times a week or a month, clean fish, wild caught, such as salmon, these cold water fish, sardine and mackerel, and yellowtail and things. Clean free-range birds, even clean insects like locusts, crickets, and grasshoppers. There's even been a popular trend in cricket protein as being very beneficial. Eat fruits and veggies, nuts and seeds, raw, live, wild, sprouted, ripe, fresh, seasonally, and organic. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Look at Jeremiah 29:5. So, in conclusion, as we can see, breaking any of the health commands that Yahweh has given us is no different from breaking one of the 10 commandments. We suffer the consequences from breaking either of them. We truly need to realize that He has given us all the instructions and commands to protect us and give us a life of abundance that He so wants us to have. And we have got to make the right choice each time we sit down to eat, and to not overeat, to not become so gluttonous just because we have the abundance and the convenience of having the foods at our fingertips. We have to live on more so of a diet variation, this feast famine like cycle. More people are getting disease for not following Yahweh's eating guidelines than any other cause of sickness because um, we're serving our guts. We're pleasing our tongues, our taste buds, because of the convenience of having so much of an abundance of what to eat. 15:26 in closing, and he said, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh and do what is right in his eyes, and shall listen to his commands, and shall guard all of his instructions, I shall bring on you none of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am Yahweh who heals you. And this concludes health by his design, ancient wisdom from the great physician. So I want to thank you for attending this webinar, and if you have any questions, please, by all means, reach out to me. Feel free to ask whatever questions you like, and I'm here to answer anything that I can to help you guys. And if y'all want to see more of these types of webinars, please tell me in the Facebook group, email me, whatever you like, and I can do more. I plan to do one on gluten, celiac disease, and non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And I'm really going to do more on this environmental toxicity, making people become aware of what we're doing to ourselves to lessen the effect of the detrimental harm that these environmental toxins play on our own bodies, but more specifically on our children, because it's our children who are really facing a more uphill battle than we are. And I believe it starts with proper education from us as the parents and the spiritual leaders of our household to lead and guide our children into doing the right things. And when you do the right thing long enough, great things are going to happen. So I really appreciate it, everybody. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask or send those to me. There is no such thing as a dumb question, I promise you. I'm a certified functional medicine practitioner and a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and a health coach. And I really appreciate you guys being here, and thank you so much. If you found this at all um, to be any effectiveness to adding to your education, please share this with all of your loved ones, as I'm trying to fulfill my mission and duty by educating, inspiring, and empowering 1.3 million people to far greater health through a message of hope and healing through God or Yahweh's word, and getting people back to ancestral eating and living a simple, holistic lifestyle. Chris Wilson of UpstreamVitality.com, where you can reach me, and I really appreciate you being here once again. Till next time, thank you so much and have a wonderful week. Take care.